Hi, I'm Harlan Krumholz from the Yale School of Medicine. I'm a cardiologist, and I'm here today with Bob Harrington, head of the Duke Clinical Research Institute and soon to be Chief of Medicine at Stanford University. Bob, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about all the things that are going on in the clinical trial world. My head's spinning lately with the topics. You've got all the controversy about the people being studied outside of the country where there's interest in getting an answer, in this case outside the United States. We've got issues around corporatization of the research infrastructure process, and we've got increasing pressure to do trials faster, cheaper, better. Let's just try to take these...
And they're all related.
And they're all related. Let's try to maybe take these one at a time.
Okay.
What do you think? I mean, I know you're thinking about these a lot, and maybe some of our listeners are wondering, you know, what's going on in the clinical research world?
Well, you mentioned three issues which I think are a big problem. I mean, can we do trials more efficiently? Can we do trials that represent the kind of patients we're seeing in practice? This gets into some of the geography question. And is there money to do these trials, and where is that money being spent from a societal perspective? And I worry a lot about all three of those, because the clinical research infrastructure that we have in this country right now is not in a good place. And you know, so my quick view on those three topics, Harlan, is that we have to start looking at different types of trial designs, different methods of doing trials, different ways of collecting data, because the sustainability is just not there.
Well, let me ask you, should a reader of a journal article be concerned at all with who conducted the study? I mean, we're seeing private equity getting involved in CROs. We're seeing, like I said, a corporatization of the clinical research. Now, you have a few academic research organizations. Is there a differentiator? I mean, why should a cardiologist who's picking up a journal article care who's involved in this study?
Yeah, so obviously I have a bias here,
yeah.
But we need to declare I run an academic research organization that competes with commercial people. I do think there's a difference, and I think there's an important difference that's been overlooked. When you're a commercial CRO, what are you interested in? You're interested in providing a service back to a corporate sponsor, or sometimes a government sponsor even, to deliver a product, and that product in this case is a clinical study. I think all the words I just used are problematic. You know, for you and I, when we're doing a clinical study, this is a human experiment, and that we're trying to find an answer that will inform the clinical community. I think that's different than commoditizing clinical research and making it something for sale. CROs, the commercialization of research, to some extent has been very good. They've professionalized it. They've pointed out some of the issues around large databases and how one collects data, the monitoring of data. That has been a real positive. But there's also been some real negatives here, that if what your interest is in selling a product, selling a service, I don't think that's the same as doing research.
Well, what if they say, but we have to go through the IRB, the FDA in many cases, depending on the trial, is going to oversee our work, that we are more efficient than those academics, and I'm in academics, obviously, and so that in fact we can allow more trials to be done because we can do them less expensively and more efficiently, yet we're under the same ethical expectations as an academic research institute.
I would say that they're not.
Yeah.
That they're conducting studies for profit. And what they're doing is that they're placing studies, including, this gets into the globalization issue, they're placing studies around the world, and they are literally just forcing these trials through, right? They're going to do, you know, 5,000 patients in a certain part of the world, and we're not going to worry so much about how many of those patients are in the U.S. But the bigger issue is that without academic oversight of these trials, how are the questions being asked? How is the question being structured? How are the data being collected?
But they've got academic researchers on their articles.
That's an interesting comment. The question is, do the academic researchers know how the data was, and do they have jurisdiction, and do they have access to the raw data?
Yeah.
Or, as you well know, because you've done some of this work in exposing some of the ghostwriting issues, who's actually writing the paper? Who's doing the analysis? Are you getting some data output, or do you actually have the data? And I think there's some real problems here that for too long have not been looked at. Let's take one of the questions you brought up with private equity. Should it be okay for a commercial CRO to do work for a corporate sponsor with the expectation that they're going to get a piece of the action if the drug is successful?
That's happened?
That's happening. That's happening. If you go to any of the major CRO websites, they have venture funds attached to their corporations which will trade services for future piece of what might
Imagine
be
they
a
have to look
successful
out for
trial.
insider.
Now, can you imagine if an academic said, well, I'll do this trial with you, but I want to get a financial reward if it's positive? They'd be outraged, but yet there's not the level of outrage because I don't think people know or nor have talked about the details here.
The other thing is not all academic research organizations, some contract out to CROs, so there's not all are the same.
No, and by no means do I want to say CROs have no role here. I think there's some things they do that's
but in partnership.
very good, but it has to be in partnership. And one of the things that the CROs have done is I think they've driven up the cost of doing clinical studies. They have created this belief that trials have to be done in a certain way, that they have to be monitored in a certain way, that they have to have this, enormous army of people traveling around the globe to visit these investigative sites. I don't think that's true. I don't think you have to do trials like that. I think we should be looking at doing trials in a much more streamlined way. But if you make your money selling services, why would you want to do that?
Per hour, yeah. And are there standards that exist? I mean, could it be that you say, here's what we do, and you challenge the CROs to do the same, and then everyone would be on a similar...
We do this all the time.
Yeah.
And I think the FDA is actually taking a positive step here. The FDA in the last year has put forward some draft guidance on risk-based monitoring. That let's not just assume that you have to do a certain amount of data monitoring throughout every single study the same way. But let's think about where the risks are. Where's the risk for poor data quality? Where's the risk for fraud? Where's the risks along the way, and how do you, attenuate that? At our place, we believe there's only a few things you really have to do well.
You have to get right.
You have to make sure the patient's got consent. And as an offshoot of that, you have to make sure the patients exist. These are real patients. You have to have...
Saying that that there are some studies where there's been questions.
Well, that's been an issue. Yeah. You want to make sure you understand that randomization was done properly and the patients were allocated to the therapy that you thought they were allocated to. You want to have exquisite work done on the collection of the safety and efficacy endpoint, typically the primary safety and efficacy endpoint, and you want to make sure there's no gross violations in how patients were cared for throughout the trial. You don't need much more than that.
So taking this back to the listeners and people who might be reading articles, knowing that some CROs are doing excellent work, or that some studies within CROs end up doing, what should a reader of an article, do you pay attention to who's
sort of
doing it?
What should the reader beware of?
Yeah, I mean, should they notice even who the research organization is, and what should that trigger in them? Anything?
I think what they should know is, was there free access to the data by the people who claim to be authors of the papers? And the big journals, New England Journal, Lancet, JAMA, Circulation,
people must
JACC.
attest to it.
People must, this as a journal editor, the people must attest to it. And I like seeing statements in, I review a lot of papers, as you do, as a peer reviewer. If I don't see that clearly delineated, I always ask, what level of access to data did the investigators have?
But I must admit, I've always wondered in those things, whether it's different for someone to say, I had access to data, they showed me all the tables.
Yeah, no, I want to know
versus
exactly
someone
what
who's
they had.
actually saw case report forms, and not that you went through them all, but that you had access from soup to nuts. If you had a question, you could go in anywhere.
Well, you've talked about this, and this is a topic I suspect you and I will get around to at some point on open science. You want to have access to all of it.
All the data.
And part of the challenge, and you know this, is that we haven't well trained our academics to do this. We haven't trained enough biostatisticians. We haven't trained enough clinical scientists.
Isn't medicine and information science now?
It's completely, I mean, that's what we do.
So we need to train the next generation.
And we need to do a better job. We need to train doctors to think more quantitatively. We need them to understand what these issues are.
I can't wait to see what you're going to do at Stanford.
Well, this is one of the key reasons and excitement of going there, which is the computational expertise on campus, the technology expertise.
Students.
You got it.
You can set the standard for the rest of us. Well, thanks so much. I mean, it's a vibrant conversation. This is really going to be interesting to see how things play out, but I'm eager to see in your next leadership position how you're able to set the standards.
Stay tuned, and I hope you come out and visit us and try to inspire the students for us.
Thanks so much, Bob.